But there's a lot of luminaries in this film. I mean, you've got, is it Huston Smith or Houston Smith?
Houston Smith.
Houston Smith and Andrew Weil. Now here again, this is something I didn't know, and I'm embarrassed to say that. Maybe everybody knew this. But Andrew Weil talks about the fact that his journalism was really responsible for Alpert getting fired.
Yes,
Talk about that.
That is true. And it took me a while to figure that out, because I was doing these 2 shows for PBS for Andy that helped launch his career in the mid-90s, and we didn't know that then. It took a while to figure all that out. So yeah, Andy was an undergraduate, and they'd made an agreement with, Leary and Alpert had made an agreement with Harvard to only be doing the psychedelic research with the graduate students. So you'll have to see the film to get into more detail, but it was Andy Weil, as an undergraduate, that wrote the investigative journalism that got Alpert fired, Richard Alpert Ramdas fired. And I also, you know, it took quite a while, but they did finally have a full reconciliation. And Andy came out to Hawaii and spent time with Ramdas. It was a really good thing. And so I actually waited for that to happen before even doing the interview. And then Houston Smith was part of the Good Friday experiments back in the 60s, where they gave psilocybin to seminary students. And 90% of those seminary students, it changed their life. They had truly mystical, transcendental, transcendent kind of experiences through that experiment that Leary and Alpert designed, called the Good Friday experiment.
I was trying to imagine what that would be like, because they were at a particular church on Good Friday when they're
in Boston.
Yeah, and they've all been dosed. It's like I was just trying to talk about set and setting. I mean, that is late.
Half of them were dosed and half of them weren't.
Okay, so there was
it was a bit of a control group, and the people who weren't were sitting in the pews listening.
So bored.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I can't say if they were or weren't, but they were certainly behaving. They were sitting in the pews listening to the sermon,
as one does in church.
Right, and the ones you could very clearly tell immediately who had the actual psilocybin, because they're looking at the stained glass and they're just wandering around the church being in awe. And that's what Houston Smith said, he soon felt the awe coming over him.